All right, so I'm going to end this chapter here just discussing the Boer War. It's some of you may have heard of it. A lot of you, I'm going to guess, have not. And like so many things that we're talking about, you should have. And what I mean by is not accusing you of not doing your job. I mean, these are historical events that also explain certain things that are going to take place later on. But there's something that that I've been wanting to mention, or a thought that I've been wanting to put out there, especially since the next section is going to be covering World War I. So we remember when we go back to our religious wars of Europe, that Europeans are Westerners. The Western legacy is that in the West, we're seeing Westerners kill each other, right? You don't have a unified West. And you see monarchies and kingdoms with religious sectarian issues being brought into it that may or may not have been the main or real reasons other than territorial expansion. But you're seeing Europeans basically kill each other. And then with the advancement of colonialism and imperialism, old and new, you're seeing more of war and conquest on non-Europeans. And then we're going to come full circle back to World War I and World War II, where Europeans are back to thoroughly killing each other again. But even World War I and World War II is not called European War I and II because, of course, we've already seen that there was already tons of European wars. It's called World War. But we still usually only think of it in terms of the West. I would put money that most have no idea what World War I's about, because World War I is extremely complicated. And most Americans think they know World War II, and I'd argue that you don't. And especially if you've had the Saving Private Ryan version your whole life. And not to discredit the movie, but what I'm saying is that's one aspect, but it's not the war. And in fact, while the U.S. is going to come in and have pivotal influence in World War I and World War II, we weren't even the major sufferers of those wars, and we didn't have those wars fought on our soil. So I think we still have a somewhat distorted view as a culture about those wars. Now, going back to the Boer War here, I think this gives us an opportunity to discuss several things. So first of all, you read the chapter that you had the Dutch settlers, okay? Boer is the Dutch word for farmer, okay? And they settled into Africa, and essentially you see British interests and imperialists there. I'm going to show you a little documentary clip after this that just kind of explains what's kind of in the book a little bit more thoroughly on the exact set of arrangements and political powers taking place. But what I want to focus on in this lecture is to say, one, yes, the treatment of Africans, as you're going to see with Leopold, is atrocious. But one of the things I usually argue is that racism is really always something used to justify something else. You rarely see a regime just say, we want to annihilate people just because. Okay? In a certain sense, I would almost argue that, and maybe someone could counter a different, have a rebuttal to this, that with Hitler's attempt to liquidate Jews, that's more of a different type of thing in the sense that it's not clear. I mean, many argue that he hurt himself, that he hurt a lot of people that would have been great for his economy, that he could have recruited to be a part of Nazis or attempted as opposed to annihilate. I mean, his killing of handicapped people, we can at least see, as cruel as it was, you can see the logic there in terms of trying to make a strong nation. But the idea of just killing somebody to get rid of them because you consider them a problem, what's the benefit to that? And that's a little bit more of a complex thing. My point is, the whole terrible treatment of the Congolese in Africa and the whole scramble for Africa is to get resources. And the racism is something used to justify the presence there of quote-unquote civilization. Okay? And when we see with what the British do to the white Boers, the Dutch settlers, that once the resources are found there and the Dutch settlers are in the way, the fact that they're white doesn't shield them from what the British are going to do. We're talking ultimately about natural resources and wealth at the expense of human life. And that's what we see consistently. And the racism then gets utilized for that. But I think sometimes we kind of miss the point sometimes of, what's really taking place. I mean, for instance, in America, slavery was done all over the world. American slavery isn't different than that. But, we already decided, that all men were created equal. So you had to have slaves that weren't men, and we created a racist form of slavery. So slavery wasn't always racist per se. It's terrible, okay, right? But we couldn't justify slavery in America unless we reduced one race to being a non-human, because we already decided that all humans are created equal. Do you see, this is the kind of rhetorical trap. And this is what I mean about us kind of paying attention to rhetoric and ideology and needs and desires and certain segments of society wanting things and having ways to justify them, right? So you're going to find that this is a nation founded on racism as well, okay? And later apartheid is going to be extremely controversial in the West. But the part that I want to just highlight here really quick is what Britain did to the Boers. Some of the first concentration camps, did you notice that? That's something we usually associate with Hitler. I mean, the British were frustrated because the Boers put up a good fight. And they weren't going to just let this be, they weren't going to let this happen. So they actually set up concentration camps with women and children, not just soldiers, in other words, okay, where they died in these terrible conditions, burning down homes and farms. This was total war. This was what Leopold was doing to Congolese, but being done to people of European descent. And it was a shocking then, as it is now, being done to these Afrikaners, or it's another term for them, of the Dutch white settlers, and also to black Africans that were also a part of it and died. And you saw in these high numbers. And so, and here again, we're going to see this springboard many things into the coming of World War I. And so, and what's interesting also is that white South Africa is going to look at this moment as they're being victims and also being able to resist as national liberation strugglers, and still do it at the expense of black Africans in South Africa. So very complicated stuff here, but at the same time, a lot of straightforward food for thought for us. And this legacy of new imperialism. So that's all I'm going to have to say on this section. I'm going to give you a little clip to reiterate, like a 3-minute clip on the Boer War. And then I'm going to give you that documentary on Leopold, which I want you to watch to the very end. And then we go on to the next section, next chapter.